My name is Miranda. I'm 20. 1 year old, I'm a college student, and I live in our beautiful family estate. Well, technically, my estate, which was left to me by my father when he passed away 3 years ago from sudden cardiac arrest. I was only 18. I had just enrolled in college when this terrible call broke the evening silence. A few words, a cold, even voice on the other end of the line, and everything. Life was divided into before and after. 1 minute Dad was alive, and the next he was gone, and I still can't come to terms with it. And before we continue, write in the comments from which country and from which city you are watching this video. We are very interested to know from which corner of the planet our video is being watched. Enjoy watching. Our house is great. It has always been like this. This is a place in front of which people involuntarily slow down or stop to look again before moving on. 2 floors of impeccable architecture, white columns, large windows, elegant balconies that are shaded by climbing roses. The lawns are manicured to the last stalk, and the kitchen is my pride. The real dream of any chef, spacious, bright, filled with the smells of freshly brewed coffee and warm bread. I lived here with my mother, with Grace, who, at 48, looked younger than ever, and who, after her father's death, remained enviably calm, as if she knew in advance that everything would be as it should be. Dad always thought everything out, she told me when the notary read out the will. He knew what he was doing. She got a lifetime allowance of $3,000 a month, enough money to not need anything. Home is for me. There were no arguments, no hints of dissatisfaction. She just smiled, as if agreeing with something obvious. We got used to this life. Became even closer, if at all possible. She made me breakfast in the morning. We talked at the table about my classes, shared stories, laughed, and everything seemed right, as it should be. That's why what happened a few months ago hit me like a bolt out of the blue. I returned home after the afternoon classes, opened the door, and immediately felt something strange. That subtle change in the air when a stranger appears in a familiar place. Mom was standing in the foyer, and next to her was a man I'd never seen before, and 2 boys, about 12 and 14 years old. They looked wary, as if they were waiting for my reaction. "Miranda, dear." Mom smiled too broadly, and her voice sounded strained. "I want you to meet John." My husband. I froze. The world swayed, shrank to a point. A husband? I probably looked as stupid as I felt. I opened and closed my mouth, but I couldn't say a word. "We got married yesterday," she added, as if she were talking about a new purchase or another culinary experiment. I looked at John. He was younger than Mom. I found out later that he was 6 years younger, and the 2 boys standing behind him were his sons. They held onto each other like 2 little conspirators, scanning me with wary eyes. But all this faded into the background, because the main thing that struck me was not my mother's marriage itself, and the fact that she never once mentioned that she was dating someone. Not a hint, not a single word, nothing. Just suddenly, a surprise. "You have a stepfather and stepbrothers now." I watched in stunned silence as John slowly walked down the hall, surveying it with the air with which potential buyers inspect real estate. He ran his hand along the mahogany staircase railing, nodded when he saw the stained glass windows in the living room, looked into the dining room, and smiled with satisfaction. "It's even better than in the photos," he said. I got goosebumps, but I forced myself to ignore the feeling. We sat down in the living room to talk. John looked quite ordinary, not the most friendly, but not unpleasant either. He asked about my training, made a couple of unfortunate but not entirely creepy jokes, and even managed to get his sons to sit down so that they wouldn't interrupt the conversation. Maybe it will work, I thought then. Maybe we'll really get along. The harmony lasted exactly 2 days, 2 deceptively quiet days, during which I almost believed that I could somehow adapt to the new reality. But then chaos set in, violent, all-encompassing, growing like a forest fire that no one tried to stop. Jake, the younger of the 2, screamed so shrilly that I jumped on the spot, almost knocking over a cup of coffee on my notes. "No way, I just started," he yelled, clutching my laptop in his hands. "Give it back." Mike, His 14-year-old brother attacked him, and so they grappled again, pulling the equipment in different directions, ignoring my attempts to stop them. "Stop it now!" I jumped up from the chair, but they didn't even turn around, completely absorbed in their fight. The laptop rocked, and before I could intervene, it slipped out of Jake's hands, hit the edge of the table, and fell to the floor with a thud. I gasped and rushed to him, but fortunately, he didn't crack. "Get out of my room!" I barked, and the boys finally froze, catching their breath. Jake flushed, his lips trembling as if he was about to burst into tears. "He started it all," he said through gritted teeth. "You even played it wrong," Mike retorted, shoving his brother. And so they grappled again, their fists flashing in front of my eyes, and before I could separate them, their struggle spread to my desk, knocking over a stack of educational materials. With a loud thud, my thick book on constitutional law flew to the floor. The pages bent, several sheets tore out of the notebook, and I almost howled with anger. "Dad!" Mike shouted, wiping the blood from his split lip. "Jake's cheating again!" I turned sharply when I heard heavy footsteps. John appeared in the doorway, leaning against the jamb with that annoying grin that always made my stomach clench uncomfortably. He folded his arms across his chest, looking at the trashed room with lazy interest. "Well, Miranda," he said, shaking his head, "they're just sorting things out. It's normal. That's how guys learn to resolve conflicts." I looked at him in disbelief. By trashing my room, I felt my pulse pounding in my temples. "Miranda." His mother's voice came from behind him, and she gently put her hand on his shoulder. "John is right. Boys are just boys. They need to learn to understand their differences." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Are you serious?" I slowly ran my hand over my face, trying to pull myself together. "They've caused complete chaos here, and are you just standing there and watching?" Mom just sighed, and John grinned even wider, as if enjoying what was happening. This has become my daily reality. Screams, fights, endless skirmishes about everything in the world. The TV remote control, the last cookie, the choice of chair, even the queue for the bathroom in the morning. No one but me saw this as a problem, but John didn't stop there. One evening, he gathered everyone in the living room. "Family gathering," he announced, standing in the center of the room with his hands on his hips, like a leader of an army before a battle. I lowered the phone and crossed my arms over my chest, preparing for another circus performance. "This house needs serious work," he said, looking around the spacious living room. I frowned. "What?" "It's all too feminine," he continued, lifting his chin. "We need changes. New furniture, new color scheme, renovation." I straightened up, feeling an unpleasant stab in my chest. "Excuse me?" John chuckled and ran his hand over the upholstery of the couch. "Look at this." He pointed fastidiously at the floral patterns and pastel colors. "It's like being in a dollhouse." We need something more masculine, more suitable for a real family home. I felt my patience snapping like a taut string. "This is my house," I said firmly, looking him straight in the eye. "Dad left it to me, not Mom, and certainly not to you. And I decide what to change here and what not to." There was a tense silence in the room. John slowly turned to me, and there was something dark and incomprehensible in his gaze. "Listen, Miranda," he said, his voice getting lower. "Ownership is just a formality. What matters is who lives here, and who is the head of the family." He took a step towards me, forcing me to lean back. "And as a man in this house..." I abruptly stood up from the couch, not letting him finish. "Let me make something clear." My words were quieter, but firmer. "You're not in charge of anything in this house. You're only living here because you're married to my mother, and your sons are here because I allow it." John's face changed instantly. His fake benevolent mask fell off in an instant. Her eyes narrowed, and her lips tightened into a thin line. He stepped forward, deliberately invading my personal space, looming over me, using his height to make me feel weaker. But I didn't move. I didn't look away. And at that moment, I realized it was a war. "Listen here, you spoiled little princess," John growled, his voice dropping to a hoarse, threatening whisper, and in that low tone, in every strangled sound, barely contained rage, taut as a string, ready to snap. I'm not going to let some student tell me what I can and can't do in my house. This is not your house, I repeated, standing my ground, even as my heart was pounding in my chest. But I didn't back down, didn't lower my eyes, didn't give him the slightest hint of weakness, because if I had, he would have won. And it never will be. I saw his face turn purple, the veins in his neck fill with blood, his fists clench until they crack, and before I realized what was happening, his hand was already in the air, swinging at me. The movement was so abrupt, so blatantly aggressive, that Mom gasped from across the room. But I didn't flinch, didn't recoil, didn't let fear get the better of me. I quickly reached into my pocket, pulled out my phone, and held it up so that he could clearly see my finger hovering over the emergency call button. "Come on," I said, my voice flat, hard, and cold as a knife blade. "Give me a reason to call the police." He froze, and the second our eyes met, I saw how his rage collided with rationality, how his internal mechanism weighed risk and consequences. I'm sure they will be very interested to hear about a man who threatens his stepdaughter in her own home. The threat acted like a bucket of icy water. John abruptly lowered his hand, his face contorted, as if he had just realized that he had almost done something irreparable. And without saying another word, he turned around and rushed up the stairs with heavy steps. "It's just me and Mom. Miranda, dear." Her voice was trembling, and there was something painfully familiar about that tremor. The note I remembered from childhood, when she tried to hide her anxiety, when she tried to pretend that everything was under control. But I knew that wasn't the case. "You shouldn't make things so tense," she continued, coming closer to me, her fingers nervously clenching on the hem of her blouse. "John is just trying to adjust to our family. He needs time to get used to everything." I stared at her, trying my best to figure out if she really believes in what he's saying. What he's saying, or just desperately trying to convince himself. "Are you serious?" My voice was filled with disbelief. "He needs to feel like a real man," Mom continued with the same painful conviction, nervously wringing her hands. "Head of the house, you know how important this is for men." I felt something breaking inside me, something important, something that had connected me to her before, something that I thought was unshakable. I looked at her, at this woman who raised me, who has always been an example of strength and wisdom for me, and I could not recognize her. "You want to know what I think?" I deliberately raised my voice so that my words would reach the second floor, to the one who was probably standing there right now, listening to my every word. "When he earns enough money to buy his own house, then he will be able to set his own rules there." I waved my hand around the living room, every detail, everything that has remained unchanged since my father passed away, every little thing that was part of our history. But this is the house my father left me," I said slowly, clearly, with emphasis on every word. "And this isn't his house to command." The silence was deafening. Then heavy footsteps sounded from above, followed by a sharp thud as John's bedroom door slammed shut with such force that the crystal chandelier in the living room shuddered, making a trembling sound. After this confrontation, something in the house changed, but not in the way I expected. There was no open hostility, no shouting or new attempts at intimidation. Everything had changed subtly, imperceptibly, but it was becoming more obvious every day. It started with breakfast. Mom and I always had our own morning ritual. For as long as I can remember, she was in the kitchen by 7 in the morning, humming softly to herself as she deftly handled the stove, and the smell of freshly brewed coffee, fresh bread, or something delicious that she was cooking for breakfast filled the house, bringing it to life. But now the kitchen was empty in the mornings. The first morning it happened, I thought maybe Mom was just sleeping. It was unusual, but everything happens. The next morning, I came downstairs a little earlier and found her in the kitchen, but she wasn't cooking, humming, or making coffee. She was just sitting at the table, fiddling with the edge of her sleeve, and John was casually lounging in a chair across from her, drinking his coffee. "Good morning," I said, and Mom looked up at me, but she didn't smile as usual. "Morning," she replied softly. I looked at John. He sipped his coffee in silence. A smirk touched his lips. But he didn't say anything, made no attempt to be polite. I slowly poured myself a cup and then casually asked, "Mom, why aren't you cooking?" "Oh," she hesitated, glancing at John before turning back to me. "It's simple. I thought we could change the traditions a bit." "It's not a tradition," I frowned. "This is our life." "Things are changing, Miranda," John said, casually stirring his coffee with a spoon. "You just need to get used to it." I felt something dark, thick, suffocating, boiling in my chest. He did not shout, did not order, did not break anything with his hands. But he was doing something much worse. He was changing the very structure of our lives, weaving himself into every aspect of it, slowly, imperceptibly, but inevitably. I went downstairs on my usual morning, still feeling the familiar sleepy silence in the air, which was usually filled with the sounds of a drink bubbling in the coffee maker, the rustle of a knife on a cutting board, and my mother's soft, humming voice. But once in the kitchen, I realized that everything had changed. The stove was cold, the coffee maker was idle, and there was no smell of toasted bread or the vanilla flavor she sometimes added to the pancake batter. All that was there was an empty, silent room, and I realized that the only sound was my own when I opened the closet door looking for cereal, and then, glancing out the window, I noticed my mother. She was sitting in the garden at a small wrought iron table with a cup of coffee in her hands, and John was sitting across from her, lounging in a chair with lazy complacency. I turned away, made myself a toast, and tried not to think about it too much. Everyone has the right to a morning rest, right? Maybe Mom just decided to change her routine a little. But it happened again the next day, and then again, and more. A week passed, and the only sounds in the kitchen were the ones I created myself, rummaging for bread or taking cold milk out of the fridge. One morning, when another silence filled the room, I finally plucked up the courage to ask about it. I found my mom in the living room, sitting on the couch, flipping through a glossy magazine, while John's boys were arguing again in the background, shouting something to each other about a video game. "Mom," I began hesitantly, stopping at the edge of the carpet. She looked up, and for a brief moment I noticed something like regret in her gaze, like a shadow of hesitation. But in the next second, her face took on a cold detachment that I hadn't known before. "Is everything okay?" I continued, choosing my words carefully. "You haven't cooked breakfast in a long time." She closed the magazine and folded her hands in her lap, looking at me as if she was trying to find the right words. "Miranda, you're already 21, she finally said in a tone that made my stomach sink uncomfortably. "You're an adult and quite capable of making your own breakfast." I froze in disbelief. "Besides," she continued, gesturing around the room, "this is your house, remember? You're the boss now, so you should learn how to take care of yourself." Her words hit me like a slap in the face, but I swallowed the pain, nodded, and said nothing, not wanting to start another argument, because the tension in the house was already so thick that it could be cut with a knife. I turned to leave, but as I walked past, I caught a glimpse of John grinning in my father's old armchair. As the days passed, I began to notice other changes. Mom's monthly allowance, the money her father had left her to keep her safe, seemed to evaporate faster than before. At first, I didn't pay attention, but soon packages from expensive stores began to appear in the lobby. Bottles of high-end wine began to appear in the kitchen, and John, who had previously been content with frozen, semi-finished products, suddenly became addicted to fine cuisine. Every other evening, Mom and John dressed up and went to the trendiest restaurants in the city. "We're trying out a new French place downtown," Mom announced one evening, pulling on her coat while John waited impatiently at the door. "Don't wait for us." I knew these restaurants. The ones where a glass of wine cost more than a week's supply of groceries, where snacks were served on tiny plates, and the dinner bill rivaled the rent for an apartment. And every time the waiter brought the check, Mom reached for her purse. My father's money, the money he had saved so that she would never need anything, was now financing romantic dinners with the man who had tried to hit me just a few weeks ago. But that wasn't enough. The trips soon began. At first it was weekends in country guest houses, then beach resorts, then mountain cabins with panoramic views. I saw my mother packing her bags. I heard her enthusiastically discussing routes. And all this happened with a strange, detached ease, as if nothing in her life had changed, as if she was just enjoying a new stage, not noticing how the house was gradually ceasing to be her home. But their latest plan exceeded all expectations. One evening, when I went down to get some water, I heard them talking from the living room. 2 weeks, Mom said, her voice sounding uncertain, as if she was still trying to convince herself. That's quite a long time, John. We need this, baby. His voice was low, enveloping, and there was a note in it that must have won her over from the very beginning. Just a couple of weeks, paradisiacal islands, the sun, the ocean. You deserve it. Mom hesitated, but to leave the children for 2 weeks. I didn't hear what he said to her in response, but whatever it was, after a minute she sighed and gave up. Her voice was low, barely audible. So be it. I took a step back, feeling cold inside. 2 weeks. I'm left alone with Jake, Mike, and John. Miranda, we need to talk, Mom said one evening, intercepting me as I was climbing the stairs to my room, getting ready to study. I immediately sensed something was wrong. There was that fake sweet tone in her voice that she always used when she needed something from me, the one that made my insides clench, because I knew that it would be followed not by a request, but by pressure, not by conversation, but by manipulation. John and I are planning a romantic vacation, she continued, smiling as if she were talking about something harmless, something that I shouldn't object to. Just for a couple of weeks, we're leaving in a few days, and we need you to look after the boys while we're gone. I literally laughed because I thought she was joking, but then I looked at her face, and my laughter instantly stuck in my throat. Of course not, I said firmly, clearly, not giving her the slightest chance to change my mind. Have you ever seen how they behave? They're like wild animals. Right at that moment, there was a crash from above, followed by a scream. Mom shuddered, but as if deliberately ignoring the obvious, she hurried to answer. They're just active. Boys are always active. They're dangerous, I interrupted her, stepping closer. They could literally kill each other, and I'm not going to be responsible for that. What if one of them breaks the other's head during another fight? What if they break their bones? No, Mom, don't even think about it. Miranda, please. She grabbed my hand, squeezing it too tightly, as if she hoped the touch would change my mind. John and I really need this vacation. We've been planning this trip for weeks. I abruptly took my hand away, stepping back. Then take them with you, I said coldly. Or better yet, leave them with their mother. She lives only 15 minutes from here. Oh, she's too old to handle them. Mom quickly shook her head. And I'm too young, I retorted, crossing my arms over my chest. Besides, I have my own plans. I have classes, assignments, study groups. The argument continued for another hour. Mom begged, then started blaming herself, then convinced me again that the boys would behave themselves. But I remained steadfast. In the end, they had no choice but to take Jake and Mike with them. When they left in the morning, it was as if someone had died. So tragic were their faces. John stomped around, loading his suitcases into the car, frowning as if I had personally ruined his life by depriving him of the opportunity to enjoy a vacation without children. Mom didn't even say goodbye properly, just gave me a disappointed look, the one that was supposed to make me feel guilty. But I didn't feel it. I just watched them leave at last. And when their car disappeared through the gate, there was such silence in the house that for a second, I didn't even know what to do about it. It was a nice silence, calm, not loaded with tension, not filled with other people's voices, not saturated with John's heavy, oppressive presence. I took a deep breath, but their sour attitude has become the new normal. It's the same thing every day. John and Mom walked around the house with their faces as if they were carrying the entire weight of the universe on their shoulders, sighing at the sight of me and exchanging meaningful glances whenever I appeared in the room, as if they were participating in some kind of competition for the title of the most unhappy person. Meanwhile, Jake and Mike continued their war. Just yesterday, they had a fight over who would turn on the TV first, with pushes, punches, and screams enough to wake the dead. Mom didn't even look up from her phone, as if constant fighting was no longer something worth paying attention to. But the worst part was that my stepbrothers found a new hobby. They started stealing my stuff. At first, it was the little things. The wireless mouse disappeared one morning, then my portable speaker disappeared. But then they switched to bigger goals. One day, I returned home after class and found that my favorite jacket was gone. I remembered for sure that I had left it on the hanger in the hallway, but now it was gone. I searched the whole house, looked into every corner, rummaged through the closet, nothing. The next day, I saw Mike in town, walking down the street, wearing my jacket. I ran up to him, grabbed his sleeve, and turned him around. "That's my jacket!" I blurted out, barely able to contain my rage. He just grinned. "What? Come on, Miranda, you're not sorry. Take it off, immediately." He rolled his eyes but pulled off his jacket and tossed it to me. "God, you're such a bore." I watched him walk away, feeling the anger slowly melt into something else. These boys thought they could get away with anything, that I would just close my eyes. But they were wrong. One day I returned home from class, threw my bag on a chair, and was about to take out my notes when I noticed that my tablet was gone. It was always on my desk, and I definitely remembered leaving it there before I left. I walked around the room, looked in the drawers, under the bed, in the bag, nothing. A wave of irritation immediately rose inside, and I already knew who to direct it at. When I went downstairs, I found Mike and Jake in the living room. They were sprawled out on the couch, each with their face buried in the phone screen, not paying the slightest attention to me. But as soon as I crossed the room, they both raised their heads in unison. "Where's my tablet?" I wasn't going to beat around the bush. They exchanged glances. "We haven't seen him," Mike said indifferently, not even bothering to look up from the screen. "I have no idea," Jake muttered, suddenly very interested in his shoelaces. "Are you sure?" I narrowed my eyes. "Yes," they replied in unison, not even trying to pretend that they really cared about this conversation. I clenched my teeth. It lasted for 3 days. For 3 days, they pretended they didn't know anything. For 3 days, they shrugged their shoulders and made innocent faces. But I knew. I just knew that one of them had stolen it. Enough. When Mike left for soccer practice, I went into his room. There was complete chaos. Clothes were strewn on the floor, candy wrappers were stuffed between books, and posters hung askew, as if someone had deliberately misaligned them to annoy perfectionists. I began to methodically inspect the room. I looked through the drawers, looked under the bed, checked the closet, and there he was, wrapped in one of his hoodies, tucked into the far corner of the bottom drawer of his dresser. I pulled it out and turned it on. The battery was almost dead. The screen was full of gaming apps and some nonsense that I didn't even want to analyze. When Mike got home, I was waiting for him in the hallway. His face when he saw the tablet in my hands was priceless. "I was going to give it to you," he muttered, shoving his hands into his pockets. "What the hell were you doing in my room?" I asked sharply. "Get out of my room and don't touch my things," I said calmly, but with such icy firmness that even Jake, who appeared around the corner, quickly retreated back. But they did not draw any conclusions. A week later, I came home and found them both sprawled on the living room floor, with my laptop between them. They had downloaded some kind of game and were now tapping away at the keys, not noticing that I was standing right behind them. I slowly, wordlessly closed the laptop, picked it up, ignoring their indignant protests. "If I see at least one of you with my things again—" I didn't finish my sentence. It wasn't because she didn't know what to say, but because they understood. But then the last straw came. I was walking home from campus one sunny day, enjoying the warm air and rare moments of solitude, when I saw something right in front of our house that made me freeze. A woman I had never met before was standing next to John, and behind them, in the middle of the driveway, my dad's car was parked. The car he loved so much. The car he'd been washing and polishing all weekend, teaching me about engines, oil changes, and proper vehicle maintenance. My car. My stomach clenched into an icy ball. I quickened my pace as I got closer and heard them talking. "In excellent condition," the woman surveyed the car with satisfaction, sliding her palm over its roof. "I think it's perfect for my commute." I froze in place. "What's going on here?" My voice sounded sharper than I expected. The woman turned around, giving me a wide, courteous smile. "Oh, hello." Her voice was deliberately friendly. "I'm here about the car. He put it up for sale on the internet." I felt the icy water spreading down my back. "This car is not for sale," I said as calmly as I could, but a fire was already starting inside me. "It belonged to my father." John slowly turned to me, and his face contorted into an ugly grimace of annoyance and contempt. "You should thank me," he spat with a venomous sneer. "I found someone who's willing to buy this piece of junk." "It's not junk!" My voice cracked with rage. "It's a woman's car anyway." He waved his hand dismissively. No self-respecting man would drive such a piece of junk. I stood there not believing what I was hearing, but he didn't shut up. "Your father." He almost spat out the word, as if the very mention of it was offensive to him. I didn't know anything about cars. I rode around in this tub, like in some kind of... He waved his hand again, not even trying to find a word, but it was clear to me what he wanted to say. No wonder he was acting like... He stopped abruptly, catching my eye. I took a step forward, feeling my rage rising. I turned to the woman who was still standing by the car, hovering in place. "I'm sorry, but you were misled." My voice was cold and firm. "This car is not for sale. It has never been sold, and it never will be." She looked from John to me, obviously sensing the tension in the air. Then she nodded and hurried away. I stood there, breathing heavily, watching her get into her car and drive away, leaving us alone. When I looked at John again, his eyes were cold and angry. "You made a big mistake, girl," he said softly. I didn't answer, but a plan has already been formed inside me. I didn't wait for the woman to leave. I didn't watch her leave, maybe even wondering why the deal had suddenly fallen through. I just walked around John, opened the car door, got behind the wheel, and slowly, carefully, as if in some kind of ritual act, backed into the garage, to the place where my father's car had always been parked while he was alive. In the rearview mirror, I could see John's face darkening, the vein in his temple starting to throb with pent-up rage. But I didn't care anymore. I got out of the car, walked around it, locked the garage with the heavy padlock that had been hanging there since I could remember, and then turned to face him. "Give me the keys to the garage," I said flatly, looking straight into his angry, narrowed eyes. "And don't ever go near my dad's car again." John didn't even answer right away. He seemed to be literally shaking with anger, his fingers curled into a fist, but he couldn't do anything, couldn't hit me, couldn't intimidate me. He knew I wouldn't be scared. With a growl, he pulled a bunch of keys out of his pants pocket and threw it violently at my feet. They rattled loudly in the driveway, bounced off, but I didn't even flinch. "You're going to regret this," he said, turning around and walking away, muttering obscenities under his breath that were probably meant for me, maybe for himself. But I didn't care. That evening, Mom cornered me in the kitchen. "How dare you talk to John like that?" Her voice was quiet, but there was so much anger in it, so much frustration that it took me a moment to figure out where her resentment came from. "Do you have any idea what kind of problems you are creating for yourself?" she hissed, looking at me as if I wasn't her daughter, but someone else's. I slammed the glass down on the counter. "Problems? Do you want to talk about problems?" My voice broke, and I didn't try to hold it back anymore. How about he tried to sell my dad's car behind my back? How about he insulted his memory by calling him a coward? "He was just trying to help," Mom shouted, and then, as if catching herself, she exhaled sharply and added in a quieter voice, "This car is just standing there. This car is mine." I cut her off, feeling my heart pounding in my throat. "Just like this house is mine." I took a step forward, not giving her a second to seize the initiative. "I've had enough, Mom. John and his sons have to leave." Mom's face contorted. "You can't just throw them out," she said, but her voice was already shaking, and she knew I wasn't joking. "I can," I replied calmly, "and I'll do it." She stood in front of me, her chest heaving with her breathing, her eyes reflecting the struggle. I saw the walls crumbling inside her as she realized that I would not change my mind. "Are you kicking us out?" "What is it?" she asked, and her voice broke. I took a deep breath. "No, Mom, not you." I looked into her eyes. "You can stay. You're my mother, and this was your home too." I paused, giving her time to process what I'd said. "But John and the boys have to go." Her face was frozen. I saw how the emotions raging inside her were replaced by something else: cold determination, stubbornness, the habit of protecting someone who, in her opinion, needed it. "If they leave," she said slowly, "I'll go with them." Her words hit me like a physical blow, but I didn't flinch. "It's your choice," I replied simply. The next day, by noon, they left. I stood at the window, watching John slam the trunk of the car shut. Mike and Jake load their things, and Mom, without even looking in my direction, sits in the passenger seat with her arms crossed over her chest, without turning around, without saying goodbye. And when the car drove out of the gate, I felt relieved for the first time in a long time, but not joy, because it wasn't over yet. I was sitting in my father's office, surrounded by his books, his photographs, his things, which he had once so carefully shelved, as if he knew that one day I would need them. But one thought kept bothering me. John is not the type to leave quietly. I needed help. The next morning, I called James Wilson. He was an old friend of my father's, his lawyer, the man who handled the will, and he always told me that if I needed anything, I could contact him. "This is serious, Miranda," he said after listening to me. "Your mother has no legal rights to the property. Your father was very clear about this." I gripped the phone, feeling something twist into a tight knot inside. "But if she decides to file a lawsuit—" "She won't do it," I started, but then stopped, because I wasn't sure anymore. "Even if we win, and we do, you're going to spend a lot of money and time fighting in court. Not to mention the emotional toll." He leaned back in his chair, and I could hear him tapping his fingers on the table. "My advice?" he exhaled. "Try to resolve this before it gets that far." James' prediction came true sooner than I expected. Just 2 days after our meeting, my phone rang. Mom's name appeared on the screen. I hesitated to answer, but I pressed the call button anyway. "I'm filing a lawsuit," she said without any preliminaries. I was silent. "About the division of property," she continued, her voice flat, but I could hear the tension behind it. "You can't just throw us out on the street." I closed my eyes, pinching the bridge of my nose. "You made your own choice, Mom," I finally said. "I'll see you in court," she replied, and hung up the phone. I contacted James immediately after I hung up, not giving myself time to doubt or worry, because I knew that if I delayed, Mom and John would take it as a sign of weakness and hit harder, find a loophole, try to pressure pity, use any methods to force me to give in. "Let's try mediation," James suggested, his voice, as always, calm, balanced, devoid of emotion, but it gave me a sense of confidence. "We will gather everyone in a room with a neutral third party, discuss the terms. It will be cheaper and faster than the court." I agreed. Mediation was scheduled for next week. I arrived at the office first, along with James, nervously clutching the documents he had prepared in advance. I didn't want to show concern, but everything inside me was boiling. Anger, fatigue, fear, which I didn't want to admit, but which still gnawed at me from the inside. Mom showed up exactly at the appointed time. Her lawyer was with her, a man in a dark suit, thin, slightly stooped, with a tired expression on his face, as if he already knew that this meeting would not bring his client anything good. And of course, John couldn't resist participating either. He followed them in, squaring his shoulders, looking smug, clearly confident that he would come out victorious. James immediately took control of the meeting. "Let's make it clear what we're dealing with here." He spread out the papers in front of him. His voice was flat, but there was steel in it, making it clear that he did not intend to tolerate stupidity. I sat with my hands folded in my lap, watching my mom's expression, how she avoided looking in my direction, how nervously she clenched her fingers. "Mr. Parker was very clear," James continued, glancing at the documents. "He assigned the drafting of the will to one of the best probate lawyers in the state." He turned a few pages, then looked directly at his mother. The house, the car, the property, everything was left to Miranda's discretion. She didn't move. "Mrs. Parker, you have received a generous monthly allowance, which is still being paid in full. There is nothing to dispute here." Her lawyer shifted uncomfortably in his chair, but said nothing. James continued. "The trial will cost you a lot. Miranda has the resources to fight this for as long as it takes. And you?" He looked directly at his mother, taking a pause. "Are you ready to spend your savings, perhaps, to get into debt for the sake of a case that you cannot win?" Silence hung in the room, thick and heavy, but it was broken by John, who jumped up from his seat, pushing a chair. "Of course she wants to continue." His voice was loud, rough, and filled with his usual malice. "We won't let some spoiled child—" "Mr. Stevens," James cut him off abruptly, not even raising his voice, but there was such authority in his intonation that even I tensed inwardly. "You are not participating in this discussion." I pressed my lips together, watching John's face darken, his nostrils flare with anger. "I'm talking to Mrs. Parker," James continued, "and to be honest, I think it would be better if you waited outside." John turned purple. "You can't kick me out." "I can," James replied calmly. John's face turned even redder. He clenched his fists, then abruptly turned around and ran out of the room, slamming the door so hard that the blinds shook. There was silence after that. Mom was sitting with her hands folded in her lap, her shoulders slumped slightly, and at that moment she looked older. It was as if the whole struggle was draining her of her vitality. "The monthly allowance is for life," James reminded her gently. $3,000 a month is a stable, guaranteed income. But legal fees can quickly absorb this amount, and the process can drag on for many years. He paused, giving her time to think about what he'd said. "Is that what you want?" She was silent. She looked at her hands, then at her lawyer, who shook his head slightly. "No," she finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. She looked up at James, then at the documents in front of her. "No, I don't want to." The papers were ready. An official confirmation of the will, a document in which she waived any future claims. She signed it without looking at me. Her hand trembled, but she completed the stroke, then silently got up and headed for the exit. I took an envelope out of the folder and handed it to her. "That should cover 6 months of rent," I said, "to help you settle in." She took it but didn't say a word. I watched her walk away and I didn't feel angry or satisfied, just the emptiness. 3 months have passed. The house is quiet, really quiet. Not the tense, viscous silence that has been here for the last few weeks with John and his sons, but a real calm, allowing you to breathe. I'm still in college, working on getting a law degree, and it's ironic how fate turned out. I always had to fight for justice, it seems. Dad's car is in the garage, polished, well-groomed, exactly the way he would like it. Sometimes in the evenings, I drive out of town just to feel this special rhythm that Dad always loved, the steady rumble of the engine, the smoothness of the ride, the ease with which the car reacts to the movement of the hand. I'm thinking about my mom. I know that she has an allowance, that if she is careful, she will have enough of it to live in comfort. But I also know that her addiction to expensive restaurants has not disappeared. I've heard from mutual friends that she and John still arrange weekend trips, continue to live as if nothing has changed. It's her choice. We all make our own decisions, and we live with the consequences.